The shuttle touched down on the crystal platform with barely a whisper. Captain James Morrison stepped out first, his eyes scanning the alien landscape that stretched before them. Everything here seemed to glow with its own inner light. The buildings, twisted upward like frozen music, their surfaces catching and reflecting colors he had never seen before. "Stay close to me, Dr. Chen," Morrison said quietly to the woman beside him. Dr. Alina Chen was Earth's top expert on alien cultures, and she had been preparing for this moment her entire career. This was humanity's first official visit to the Zephyrian homeworld. Morrison was her assigned protector. The Zephyrians who came to greet them moved like water given form. Their skin had a silver sheen that seemed to shift in the light, and their eyes were unlike anything on Earth. When they spoke, their voices sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Welcome, visitors from Earth," one of them said, bowing gracefully. "Her Majesty Queen Lirelei awaits your presence in the royal chamber." Morrison walked slightly ahead as they were led through corridors that seemed carved from living starlight. His military training kept him alert, but nothing here felt threatening. If anything, the place felt ancient and peaceful. Like a temple that had stood for thousands of years, Dr. Chen was barely containing her excitement. She whispered to Morrison, "Do you see how their markings change color when they communicate? It's like they're speaking with light itself." Morrison nodded, though his attention was focused on their surroundings. The halls were filled with Zephyrians going about their daily lives. Some stopped to stare at the human visitors with curious but friendly expressions. Children, or what Morrison assumed were children, peeked around corners with wide, glowing eyes as they walked deeper into the palace. Morrison noticed something strange. The air itself seemed to hum with energy, and he could swear he heard music that wasn't quite music. It was more like a feeling than a sound, something that made his chest tight in a way he couldn't explain. "The throne room is just ahead, there," Guide announced. The massive doors opened without a sound, revealing a chamber that took Morrison's breath away. The ceiling stretched so high, it seemed to disappear into starlight. Pillars of what looked like crystallized water supported the room, and everything was bathed in a soft, warm glow at the far end of the chamber. On a throne that seemed to be carved from a single enormous crystal sat Queen Lirelei. Morrison had seen pictures of Zephyrians before, but nothing had prepared him for seeing their queen in person. She was tall and elegant, with markings that flowed across her silver skin like living art. Her hair moved as if underwater, and her eyes held depths that reminded him of looking into space itself. Dr. Chen stepped forward to begin the formal greeting, but Morrison moved with her, maintaining his protective position. It was his job to stay alert, to watch for any signs of danger, to keep the doctor safe while she conducted her diplomatic work. The moment Queen Lirelei's eyes fell on Morrison, everything changed. She went completely still. The flowing patterns on her skin stopped moving. Her eyes, which had been shifting through different shades of blue and silver, locked onto Morrison's face with an intensity that made the air in the room feel thick. Morrison felt it too, though. He didn't understand what was happening. Looking at the Queen, he felt a strange sensation, like he was trying to remember something that was just out of reach. His hand unconsciously moved to his temple, a habit he'd had since childhood. Whenever he was trying to think through something difficult, the Queen's reaction to this simple gesture was immediate and startling. Her breath caught, and the light patterns on her skin flickered like a candle in the wind. The other Zephyrians in the room began to notice their Queen's strange behavior. Her advisors exchanged worried glances. The guards, who had been standing at relaxed attention, shifted slightly, their eyes moving between their frozen queen and the human male who seemed to be the cause of her distress. Dr. Chen, unaware of the undercurrents in the room, began her prepared speech. "Your Majesty, on behalf of the people of Earth, I bring greetings and hopes for friendship between our worlds." But Queen Lirelei didn't seem to hear her. Her eyes remained fixed on Morrison, and he found himself staring back, unable to look away. There was something about her face, something familiar that he couldn't place. It was like trying to remember a dream after waking up. Morrison's military training kicked in. He could sense tension in the room, could feel the way the atmosphere had changed. His instincts told him something was wrong, but he couldn't identify the threat. The queen didn't seem angry or afraid. She seemed shocked, confused. He'd never seen anything like it. Your Majesty? Dr. Chen tried again, her voice carrying a note of concern. One of the queen's advisors, a tall Zephyrian with darker markings, stepped forward. Perhaps Her Majesty needs a moment to adjust to our guest's presence, he said diplomatically, but his eyes kept darting to Morrison with something that might have been suspicion. Morrison straightened. Falling back on his training, if our presence is causing distress, Dr. Chen and I can withdraw until no. The queen's voice cut through the air like a blade. It was the first word she had spoken since they entered the room, and it carried such weight that everyone fell silent. No, you, you will stay. She was still staring at Morrison, and now he could see that her hands were trembling slightly. The lights in her skin were pulsing in a pattern that seemed almost like a heartbeat. Dr. Chen looked between Morrison and the queen, clearly confused by the strange dynamics at play. Your Majesty, perhaps we could begin with the cultural exchange protocols we discussed. But Queen Leorelei seemed to be having trouble focusing on anything except Morrison. When she finally managed to look at Dr. Chen, her expression was distant, distracted. Yes, she said slowly. Cultural exchange, of course. The meeting that followed was unlike anything Morrison had experienced. The queen would start to speak about trade agreements or technological sharing, but her attention kept drifting back to him. She would pause mid-sentence, her eyes finding his across the room. And for a moment, it was as if everyone else disappeared. Morrison tried to maintain his professional demeanor, but he found himself equally distracted. Every time he looked at the queen, he felt that strange sense of familiarity grow stronger. It was more than just thinking she looked familiar. It was deeper than that. It was like looking at someone he should know, someone important, but all. His memories of that person had been locked away. The other Zephyrians in the room were becoming increasingly agitated. They whispered among themselves in their musical language, and Morrison caught gestures that seemed to be directed at him. He began to wonder if he was somehow offensive to their culture, if his presence was breaking some rule he didn't know. About Dr. Chen, professional to her core, managed to keep the conversation going despite the strange atmosphere. But even she was beginning to show signs of frustration. This was supposed to be a historic moment, the first formal diplomatic meeting between humans and Zephyrians. And instead, it felt like everyone was distracted by something no one wanted to talk about. As the meeting dragged on, Morrison noticed something else. The queen's reactions to him weren't just surprise or confusion. There was something else in her expression, something that made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. When she looked at him, she looked sad. Not afraid or angry, but deeply, profoundly sad. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She was looking at him like she was seeing a ghost. By the time the formal meeting ended, Morrison felt like he had been through a battle. The queen had managed to complete the basic diplomatic requirements, but it was clear that her heart wasn't in it. She agreed to the proposed cultural exchanges and trade discussions, but her responses were mechanical, distant, as they were preparing to leave. Queen Leorelei spoke one last time. "Captain Morrison," she said, and hearing his name in her voice made something inside him twist. "I hope you will find your stay on our world, enlightening." There was something in the way she said it, something that suggested she knew things about him that he didn't know himself, as they were escorted from the throne room. Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't begin to understand. Walking back through the crystal corridors, Dr. Chen was unusually quiet. Finally, she said, "James, what was that about?" "The queen acted like she knew you." Morrison shook his head, still trying to process what had happened. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I felt it too, like I should know her, but I can't remember. From where?" What Morrison didn't see was Queen Leorelei, watching them leave from a hidden balcony, her hands pressed against the crystal wall. Her whole body shaking with emotions she thought she had buried 50 years ago. That night, Morrison couldn't sleep. He lay in his guest quarters, staring at the ceiling that seemed to shift and flow like water. The room was comfortable enough, But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the queen's face. The way she had looked at him, like she was seeing someone else entirely, he got up and walked to the window. The alien city stretched out below him, glowing softly in the darkness. It was beautiful, but it also felt strangely familiar. Like he had seen it before, maybe in a dream he couldn't quite remember. Miles away. In the royal palace, Queen Lirelei stood in her private chambers, her hands trembling as she held an old crystal tablet. The surface showed images from 50 years ago, memories preserved in Zephyrian technology that never faded. She touched the crystal, and the images came alive. A younger version of herself appeared, laughing as she danced with a tall Zephyrian male. His name was Kelthus, and he had been her husband, her partner, her other half. The love between them had been legendary among their people. "My queen," he said in the memory, his voice warm with affection. "Promise me something. If anything ever happens to me, don't let grief consume you. Live, rule, be the leader our people need." Lirelei had made that promise, but she had never expected to have to keep it. The memory shifted, showing Kelthus in his explorer's uniform, preparing for what would be his final mission. He was part of a small team sent to scout the outer regions of their territory, looking for new worlds where their people could expand if needed. "I'll be back before you know it," he had told her, kissing her forehead. "This is just a routine survey mission, nothing dangerous, but space had other plans." 3 days into their journey, Kelthus and his team encountered something no one had expected, a massive spatial storm that appeared out of nowhere. Their ship was caught in gravitational forces that pulled them far off course, toward a small blue planet in an unexplored solar system. Lirelei had received their last transmission, crackling with static and fear. "Engine failure, ... losing power, attempting emergency landing on the third planet. Tell the queen, ... tell her I love her, ... Then silence. The search had gone on for months. Every available ship had been sent to look for the missing crew, but the spatial storm had scattered wreckage across multiple star systems. They found pieces of the ship, but no survivors, no bodies, no answers. Eventually, they had to accept the truth. Prince Kelthus was gone. Back in the present, Morrison was pacing his room, trying to understand what was happening to him. Since the meeting with the queen, he had been having flashes of ... something. Not quite memories, but feelings. It's emotions that didn't belong to him. He found himself thinking about things he had never experienced. The feel of flying through space. The weight of responsibility for an entire people. The overwhelming love for someone whose face he couldn't quite see. It was driving him crazy. Dr. Chen knocked on his door. "James, are you all right? I heard you moving around." Morrison opened the door, and she could see the confusion on his face. "I'm fine. Just having trouble sleeping." "That makes 2 of us," she said, stepping into the room. "That meeting today was the strangest thing I've ever experienced." The queen barely seemed to hear half of what I said. She kept staring at you like you were a puzzle she was trying to solve. Morrison rubbed his temples, a gesture that had become more frequent since arriving on the planet. "I felt it too, like she knew me from somewhere, but that's impossible. I've never been off Earth before this mission." What Morrison didn't know was that Queen Lirelei had spent the entire night researching him. Her advisors had provided her with everything they could find about Captain James Morrison. Born 35 years ago at a remote research station. Parents unknown. Was adopted by a military family when he was just a baby. Grew up to become one of Earth's finest soldiers. But it was the details that made her heart race. The research station where he was born had been abandoned suddenly, with no explanation in the official records. The timing matched perfectly with when Kelthus had gone missing. The location was in the same region where the wreckage of the ship had been found. Too many coincidences, but even more disturbing were the physical similarities. Morrison's height, his build, even the way he carried himself, it all reminded her of Kelthus, and that gesture he made, touching his temple when he was thinking. Kelthus had done the exact same thing. The next morning, Morrison woke with a splitting headache and memories that weren't his own. He saw flashes of the Crystal City, but from different angles, as if he had walked those streets before. He remembered conversations in the Zephyrian language, though he had never learned it. Most disturbing of all, He remembered the feeling of loving someone with every fiber of his being, someone whose face was always just out of focus. At breakfast, Dr. Chen noticed his distraction. "You look terrible. Are you getting sick?" "I don't know," Morrison said honestly. "I keep having these dreams, but they don't feel like dreams. They feel like memories." "What kind of memories?" Morrison hesitated. It sounded crazy, but he needed to tell someone. "I remember being here before, not as a human, but as something else, someone else. I remember caring about these people, about their queen, like they were my family." Dr. Chen studied his face carefully. "James, that's impossible. You were born on Earth, you've lived your entire life there." "I know that," Morrison said, frustration creeping into his voice. "And knowing it and feeling it are two different things. When I look at Queen Lirile, I feel like I'm looking at someone I've loved for years. And when she looks at me, I can see the same recognition in her eyes." Meanwhile, Queen Lirile was meeting with her closest advisor, Commander Vexelia. Commander was a practical woman who had served the royal family for decades, and she was deeply concerned about her queen's behavior. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, you've been acting strangely since the humans arrived. The council is starting to notice." Lirile turned from the window where she had been staring out at the city. "Vex, do you remember Prince Kelthus?" "Oh, of course, my queen. He was a good man and a fine leader. His loss was a tragedy for all of us. What if I told you he might not be lost? What if he had somehow survived, but in a different form?" Commander Vexelia frowned. "My queen, I don't understand." Lirile activated a holographic display showing images of Morrison alongside old pictures of Kelthus. "Look at them, Vex. Really look. The bone structure, the way they move, even their mannerisms. It's like they're the same person." "Impossible. Humans and Zephyrians are completely different species, are they?" Lirile asked. "We know so little about consciousness, about the soul. What if there was a way to preserve someone's essence, to transfer it into a different form?" The commander looked at the images more carefully, and her expression grew troubled. The similarities were undeniable, but the implications were staggering. "Even if that were possible," she said slowly, "what would it mean? If this human somehow carries Prince Kelthus' consciousness, does that make him your husband? Does he have any legal claim to the throne? And what about his human life? His human identity?" These were the questions that had been tormenting Lirile all night. If Morrison was somehow Kelthus, did she have the right to tell him? Would knowing the truth destroy the man he had become? And what about her own heart? Could she love someone who looked like her husband, but had lived a completely different life? As the day progressed, both Morrison and Queen Lirile found themselves struggling with emotions they couldn't fully understand. Morrison felt drawn to the palace, to the queen, in ways that made no logical sense. Queen Lirile found herself making excuses to observe the human delegation. Watching Morrison's every move for signs of the man she had lost, the tension came to a head during the afternoon session. Dr. Chen was discussing trade agreements when Morrison suddenly stood up, his face pale. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice strained. "I need some air." As he walked toward the door, Queen Lirile called out, "Captain Morrison." He stopped and turned back to her. For a moment, they stared at each other across the room, and everyone present could feel the electricity in the air. "Perhaps," the queen said carefully, "you would like a tour of our city? To help you feel more comfortable here?" Morrison nodded. Not trusting his voice, he didn't understand what was happening to him, but he knew he needed answers. And somehow, he sensed that Queen Lirile held the key to understanding the chaos in his mind as they left the meeting room together. Neither of them noticed the worried expressions on the faces of their respective advisors. They were both walking toward a truth that would change everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. The city tour began in awkward silence. Queen Lirile walked beside Morrison through the glowing streets, her guards following at a respectful distance. Morrison kept glancing at her, trying to understand why being near her felt so natural, so... "Right, this is the market district," she said, pointing to vendors selling fruits that sparkled like jewels. "Our people have traded here for over 1,000 years. Morrison nodded, but his attention wasn't on the market. He was watching the Queen's hands as she gestured. Those hands looked familiar, like he had held them before. The thought made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. "Your Majesty," he said suddenly. "Can I ask you something?" She turned to him, her silver eyes reflecting the light around them. "Of course. Yesterday when you first saw me, you looked like you'd seen a ghost?" "Why?" Queen Lirelei stopped walking. For a long moment, she just stared at him, and Morrison could see her struggling with something. Finally, she said, "You remind me of someone I knew. Someone very important to me." "Who?" "My husband. He died 50 years ago." Morrison felt like he'd been punched. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. His name was Kelthus. He was an explorer, brave and kind. He died in a crash while on a mission to survey distant worlds." She paused, then added quietly, "You move like he did. You have the same way of thinking." "The same gestures?" Morrison touched his temple automatically, the gesture he'd made 1,000 times before. Queen Lirelei's breath caught when she saw it. "He used to do that," she whispered. "Exactly like that, when he was trying to work through a problem." They stood there in the middle of the alien street, staring at each other. Morrison felt something stirring in his mind, like a door trying to open. Images flashed through his head, this same street, but from a different perspective. Walking here with the Queen, but not as a stranger, as someone who belonged. "This is impossible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Queen Lirelei asked. "Come with me. There's something you need to see." She led him to a quiet garden behind the palace. The space was filled with plants that glowed softly in the fading light, and at the center stood a crystal monument. Morrison approached it slowly, and as he got closer, he could see that it held images, moving pictures preserved in the crystal itself. "This is a memory stone," the Queen explained. "It holds the last message Kelthus sent before his ship crashed." She touched the crystal, and suddenly Morrison could see a man who looked exactly like him. Same face, same build, same eyes. But this man was clearly Zephyrian, with the silver skin and flowing markings of their people. "Emergency transmission," the figure in the crystal said, his voice crackling with static. "Engine failure. We're going down on the 3rd planet."
"Tell
"Queen Lirelei, tell her I love her. Tell her I'll find a way back to her somehow." Morrison staggered backward. The voice was his voice. Not similar, identical. He reached out to steady himself and found the Queen's hand supporting him. "How is this possible?" he gasped. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I've been researching your background. You were born at a research station that was abandoned. The same year Kelthus disappeared, in the same region where his ship went down." Morrison's mind was reeling. "I have human parents, human memories. Do you?" she asked gently. "Or do you have the memories someone gave you?" As if triggered by her words, Morrison was suddenly hit with a flood of images. He saw himself flying through space, but not in a human ship. He saw the Queen, but younger, laughing as they danced together. He felt the weight of responsibility for an entire people. The love for this woman that went deeper than anything he'd ever experienced. "No," he said, backing away. "This isn't real. I'm Captain James Morrison. I grew up on Earth. I have a job, a life, responsibilities." Kelthus had responsibilities too, the Queen said sadly. He was a prince, a leader, a husband. If somehow his consciousness survived, if it was placed into a human body, wouldn't it be natural for him to build a new life, to become someone new while still being who he was? Morrison felt like the ground was shifting under his feet. Everything he thought he knew about himself was being challenged. Even if that were true, what would it mean? "I can't just abandon my life on Earth. I have duties, people depending on me." "I know," Queen Lirelei said. "I'm not asking you to abandon anything. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that you might be more than you think you are." Over the next few days, Morrison found himself drawn into a deeper investigation of his own past. With the Queen's help, he accessed records that had been sealed for decades. What they found was disturbing. The research station where Morrison was born had been studying alien technology. Specifically, They had been trying to understand consciousness transfer, the ability to move a person's mind from one body to another. The project had been shut down suddenly, all records classified, all personnel reassigned. Dr. Chen's father was part of that research team, Queen Lirelei revealed. Dr. Richard Chen. He was the lead scientist on the consciousness transfer project. Morrison felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. That's why she was chosen for this mission. It wasn't random. Someone knew what we might find here. But the more he learned, the more conflicted he became. The memories that were surfacing weren't just images, they were emotions. He remembered loving the Queen with a depth that scared him. He remembered feeling responsible for her people, caring about their welfare as if they were his own family. At the same time, he had real feelings for his human life. He had friends on Earth, a career he was proud of, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with being an alien prince. The internal conflict was tearing him apart. Dr. Chen noticed his distraction during their official meetings. James, you're not yourself lately. What's going on? I don't know who myself is anymore, he said honestly. What if everything I thought I knew about my life was wrong? What if I wasn't who I thought I was? You're talking crazy, Dr. Chen said, but her voice lacked conviction. She had noticed the changes in him too. The way he seemed to understand the Zephyrian language without learning it. The way he moved through the palace like he'd been there before. The way Queen Lirelei looked at him. That night Morrison couldn't sleep again. He found himself walking through the palace corridors, not quite sure where he was going. His feet seemed to know the way without his mind directing them. Ended up in a section of the palace he'd never been shown, standing in front of a door that felt familiar. He opened it and found himself in what was clearly a private study. Books and artifacts filled the room. And on the desk sat a picture of Queen Lirelei and a man who looked exactly like Morrison, but with Zephyrian features. You found his study, a voice said behind him. Morrison turned to see Queen Lirelei standing in the doorway. She looked sad, but not surprised. I used to come here when I missed him, she said. Everything is exactly as he left it. His books, his research, his plans for improving our world. Morrison picked up one of the books, and to his amazement, he could read the Zephyrian script, not just read it, but understand it completely. It was about advanced physics, concepts that should have been far beyond his human education. This is impossible, he said, for what felt like the 100th time. Is it, Queen? Lirelei asked. Or is it just impossible for James Morrison? What if you're not just James Morrison? Morrison set the book down with shaking hands. Even if that's true, what are you asking of me? To give up everything I've built on Earth? To become someone I'm not sure I am? I'm not asking you to give up anything, she said. I'm asking you to consider that you might be able to be both. James Morrison and Kelthas, human and Zephyrian. A bridge between our worlds. The idea was terrifying and exciting at the same time. Morrison felt pulled in two directions, toward the life he knew on Earth, and toward something deeper here, something that felt like coming home. I need time to think, he said. Of course, Queen Lirelei said, but James, Kelthas, whoever you are, know this, you're not alone in this. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Because I love both the man you were and the man you've become. Is it? Morrison left the study. He realized that the Queen had just given him the most precious gift possible, the freedom to choose his own identity. But with that freedom came the most difficult decision of his life. Who did he want to be? The breaking point came 3 days later. Morrison was in the middle of a security briefing when it happened. Dr. Chen was discussing the final trade agreements when Morrison suddenly doubled over, clutching his head in pain. James? Dr. Chen rushed to his side. What's wrong? But Morrison couldn't answer. His mind was being flooded with memories that weren't supposed to exist. He saw himself as Kelthas, arguing with the Zephyrian Council about expanding their territory. He felt the weight of a crown that had never touched his human head. He remembered the exact moment he had proposed to Queen Lirelei, the joy in her eyes, the way her light patterns had danced with happiness. Get Queen Lirelei, he managed to gasp. Something's happening to me. When the queen arrived, she found Morrison on the floor, his eyes wide with confusion and pain. But there was something else there, too. Recognition. Deep, complete recognition. "Lyra," he whispered, and her breath caught. He had never called her by name before, always keeping the formal distance of his position. But now he said it like he had said it 1,000 times before, with love and familiarity. "I remember," he said, struggling to sit up. "I remember everything. The crash, the pain, the fear that I would never see you again. But how is that possible, Queen?" Lyra knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she helped him to a chair. "There's something I haven't told you. Something we discovered in the wreckage of Keltha's S-ship." She activated a holographic display that showed the crash site on a distant moon. The ship had been completely destroyed, but in the center of the wreckage, they had found something extraordinary. A consciousness preservation device still active after 50 years. "Your people found the wreckage first," she continued. "Human research team led by Dr. Richard Chen. They found Keltha's dying in the wreckage, but they also found this device. It contained his complete consciousness, everything that made him who he was." Morrison stared at the image, understanding beginning to dawn on him. "They transferred it, put his consciousness into a human body. Not just any body, Queen," Lyra said quietly. "They created a hybrid, part human, part Zephyrian. A body that could hold both sets of memories, both types of consciousness. They gave you a human childhood, human memories, but underneath it all, Kelthas was still there, waiting." Dr. Chen had been listening in stunned silence. Now she spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father, he was part of this. He knew what you were." Morrison looked at her, and now he could see the family resemblance. Dr. Richard Chen had been the lead scientist on the project. He had saved Kelthas' life by giving him a new one, but he had also created an impossible situation. "Your father was a good man," Morrison said, "and somehow he knew this was true. He saved me when my own people couldn't, but he also gave me a burden I didn't know I was carrying." The memories were coming faster now. Morrison remembered his last conversation with Queen Lyra before the mission. They had been planning their future together, talking about the children. They wanted to have the changes they wanted to make to their world. "We were going to announce your pregnancy when I returned," he said suddenly, and Queen Lyra's eyes filled with tears. "How could you possibly know that?" "We told no one, because I was there. I remember holding you that night, feeling so happy about our future. But you lost the baby after I disappeared, didn't you? The stress, the grief." Queen Lyra nodded, unable to speak. It had been one of the darkest periods of her life, losing both her husband and their unborn child within weeks of each other. Morrison reached out and took her hands. The gesture felt completely natural, like he had done it 1,000,000 times before. "I'm so sorry. For leaving you, for making you go through that alone." "You didn't choose to leave," she said. "You didn't choose what happened after. But you're here now." "But am I?" Morrison asked. "Am I Kelthas? Or am I James Morrison? Because I remember being both. I remember growing up on Earth, joining the military, building a life there. Those memories are just as real as the ones from here." Dr. Chen was studying them both with scientific fascination mixed with personal confusion. "This is incredible. Not just one person or the other. You're both. A complete fusion of two separate lives." Morrison nodded.
Ow.
"And that's the problem. How can I be loyal to my human duties when I remember being a Zephyrian prince? How can I love my Earth life when I remember loving something completely different?" Here, Queen Lyra stood up and walked to the window, looking out at her city. "Maybe the question isn't which life you should choose. Maybe the question is what you want to do with both of them." "What do you mean?" She turned back to him, and he could see a new determination in her eyes. "You're unique, Morrison. You're the only being in existence who truly understands both. Our peoples. You've lived as both human and Zephyrian. You could be the bridge between our worlds." Morrison felt the weight of that possibility. "But what about us? What about what we had before?" Queen Lyra smiled sadly. "What we had before was beautiful, but it was 50 years ago. I'm not the same person I was then, and neither are you. You've lived an entire life, made your own choices, become your own man. I can't ask you to just step back into the past." "But I love you," Morrison said. the words coming out before he could stop them. Both versions of me love you. The prince who married you and the captain who just met you? How is that possible? Because love isn't just about memory, she said. It's about connection, about recognizing something in another person that calls to your soul. You fell in love with me again because that connection never died, even when everything else changed. Dr. Chen cleared her throat. This is all very romantic, but we need to think about the practical implications. If the Earth's government finds out what Morrison really is, what do you think they'll do? They'll want to study him to understand how the consciousness transfer worked. They might try to replicate it. Morrison hadn't thought about that. He was a military officer with top-secret clearance, who turned out to be an alien prince with his consciousness transferred into a hybrid body. The security implications were staggering. And what about your people? Dr. Chen continued, looking at Queen Lirille. How will they react when they find out their lost prince has returned as a half-human? Queen Lirille straightened her shoulders. My people will accept what I tell them to accept. But you're right that this situation is complicated. Morrison stood up, pacing as he tried to work through the implications. So what are my options? I can't pretend to be just James Morrison anymore, now when I remember being Kelthus. But I can't just abandon my human life either. Too many people are depending on me. There is another option, Queen Lirille said slowly. You could be both. Officially, you could serve as a permanent ambassador between our worlds. Someone who truly understands both cultures because he's lived in both. The idea was appealing, but Morrison could see the challenges. What about us? Could we find a way to build something new together, knowing what we've both been through? Queen Lirille walked over to him and placed her hand on his cheek. I don't know, but I'd like to try. Not as the people we were 50 years ago, but as the people we are now. Morrison leaned into her touch, feeling a sense of completion he hadn't experienced since arriving on the planet. I'd like that too. But first, we need to figure out how to explain this to both our governments without starting a panic. Dr. Chen smiled for the first time in days. Actually, I think I can help with that. My father left detailed records of the consciousness transfer project. If we present this right, we can frame it as the greatest diplomatic breakthrough in human history. Morrison looked at both women, one who had loved him in the past, one who had helped him discover his present. For the first time since his memories had returned, he felt hopeful about the future. Then let's do it, he said. Let's find a way to make this work. As they began planning how to reveal the truth to both their peoples, Morrison realized that he was no longer torn between two identities. He was ready to embrace being both James Morrison and Kelthus, to become something new that honored both his human and Zephyrian heritage. The hardest part was over. Now came the real work of building a future that none of them could have imagined. The hardest conversation of Morrison's life took place over a secure communication link with Earth. He sat in the Zephyrian communication chamber, Dr. Chen beside him for support, as he faced the skeptical expressions of the Earth Defense Council. On the holographic display, "Let me get this straight, Captain," said General Harrison, his voice tight with disbelief. "You're telling us that you're actually an alien prince whose consciousness was transferred into a human body 50 years ago. Morrison took a deep breath. "I know how it sounds, sir, but Dr. Chen has her father's research files. The evidence is all there." Dr. Chen activated her tablet, displaying the classified documents her father had left behind. "The consciousness transfer project was real, General. My father's team successfully preserved Prince Kelthus' consciousness and integrated it with human genetic material. Captain Morrison is living proof that the project worked." "Even if that's true," another council member interjected, "what does this mean for his position in our military? His security clearance? His loyalty?" Morrison felt Queen Lirille's hand squeeze his shoulder supportively. They had discussed this moment for hours, preparing for every possible objection. "My loyalty has never been in question," Morrison said firmly. "I've served Earth faithfully my entire conscious life. Learning about my origins doesn't change that. If anything, it makes me uniquely qualified to help both our peoples." General Harrison leaned forward. "How do we know this isn't some kind of alien infiltration? How do we know you haven't been compromised?" "Because," Dr. Chen interrupted, He had no idea what he was until 3 days ago. If this was some kind of long-term spy operation, don't you think they would have activated him sooner? The debate continued for over an hour. Morrison answered every question, submitted to every test they could conduct remotely, and gradually watched the skepticism on their faces turn to grudging acceptance. Finally, General Harrison spoke again. Assuming we accept this incredible story, what are you proposing, Captain? I'm proposing to serve as a permanent ambassador between our worlds. I understand both cultures because I've lived in both. I can help prevent misunderstandings and build a lasting peace. And your personal situation with their queen? Morrison felt his cheeks warm, but he answered honestly. Queen Lee Relay and I are working to understand our relationship. Whatever happens between us personally won't interfere with my professional duties. After the Earth Council ended their call, Morrison slumped in his chair, emotionally drained. Queen Lee Relay sat beside him, her own expression thoughtful. That went better than I expected, she said. Now we have to convince your people, Morrison replied. That might be even harder. The next day, Queen Lee Relay called a gathering of the Zephyrian High Council. Morrison stood beside her throne, feeling the weight of dozens of alien eyes studying him. He had insisted on being present for this revelation, knowing that hiding would only make things worse. Honored council members, Queen Lee Relay began. I have called you here to share news that will change our understanding of what's possible in this universe. She told them everything. About Keltha's S-crash, about the human scientists who found him, about the consciousness transfer that had saved his essence by giving it new form. The council listened in stunned silence as she explained how their lost prince had returned to them as a human Cephrian hybrid. Commander Vexalia was the first to speak. Your Majesty, with respect, this sounds like the desperate fantasy of a grieving widow. Morrison stepped forward. Commander, do you remember the conversation we had about expanding the eastern settlements? You argued that the soil wouldn't support our traditional crops, and I suggested we try the new hybrid plants that the Agricultural Council had developed. Vexalia's eyes widened. That conversation happened 30 years before this human was born. How could you possibly know about it? Because I was there, Morrison said simply. Prince Kelthus was there, continued sharing memory after. Memory that only the real Prince Kelthus could have known. Personal conversations, private moments, state secrets that had never been recorded. With each revelation, the council members grew more convinced. But conviction brought its own problems. If you are truly Prince Kelthus, said Council Member Theron, then you have a legal claim to the throne. You were the Queen's consort and heir apparent. Morrison shook his head. I have no interest in challenging Queen Lerelay's rule. She has led our people with wisdom and strength for 50 years. I'm here to serve, not to disrupt. But the law is clear. Theron insisted. If Prince Kelthus lives, he has rights that must be acknowledged. Queen Lirelay stood up, her voice carrying absolute authority. Then we changed the law. I propose that Morrison be granted a new title, Ambassador Prince. He will have the rights and honors of royalty, but his primary role will be as our representative to the human world. The debate that followed was intense but respectful. In the end, Council voted unanimously to accept Morrison's unique status and create the new position of Ambassador Prince. As the Council dispersed, Morrison found himself alone with Queen Lirelay in her private chambers. The weight of the day's events hung between them. So, she said with a small smile, Ambassador Prince Morrison. How does that sound? It's terrifying, he admitted. I'm not sure I'm ready for this much responsibility. You were ready 50 years ago, she said, and you're ready now. The only difference is that now you have experience from two worlds to draw upon.
Morrison walked to the window,
looking out at the city that was somehow both alien and familiar. What about us, Lirelay? We've been so focused on the political aspects that we haven't talked about what this means for us personally. She joined him at the window. I've been thinking about that. We can't just pick up where we left off 50 years ago. Too much has changed. You've changed, and you've become someone entirely new. So what do? We start over, she said. We get to know each other again, not as the people we were, but as the people we are now, Maybe we'll fall in love again. Maybe we won't, but we owe it to ourselves to find out. Morrison turned to face her, studying the face he remembered loving so deeply. I'd like that. But I need you to know something. I care about you as Morrison too, not just because of Keltha's S memories. When I look at you, I feel something that's entirely my own. Good, she said, her light patterns shifting to a warm golden color. Because I feel the same way. 6 months. Later, Morrison stood in the same throne room where he had first arrived as a confused human guard. But now he stood there as Ambassador Prince Morrison, representing both Earth and the Zephyrian Empire in the signing of the most comprehensive peace treaty in galactic history. Dr. Chen had been promoted to Director of Interspecies Relations, and she watched proudly as her friends signed the documents that would ensure lasting cooperation between their peoples. Queen Lirelei sat on her throne, but her eyes were on Morrison. Over the past months, they had indeed started over, slowly building a new relationship based on who they were now, rather than who they had been. It was different from their first love, more complex, more mature, but no less deep. With these signatures, Morrison announced to the gathered representatives from both worlds, we pledge to share knowledge, resources, and friendship. We commit to solving our differences through dialogue rather than conflict. And we promise to explore the universe together as partners. As the ceremony concluded and the dignitaries began to mingle, Morrison felt a sense of completeness he had never experienced before. He was no longer torn between two identities. He had found a way to honor both his human experience and his Zephyrian heritage. Queen Lirelei approached him, her formal demeanor melting into a warm smile. Well done, Ambassador Prince. Kelthas would be proud. Morrison is pretty pleased too, he replied, making her laugh. I have something for you, she said, producing a small crystal pendant. It's a memory stone, but this one is empty.
How?
I thought we could fill it with new memories. Our memories. Morrison took the pendant, feeling its weight and warmth. Like that. Starting with this moment. As they touched the crystal together, it began to glow softly, recording their first shared memory as Morrison and Lirelei rather than Kelthas and his queen. It was a new beginning, built on the foundation of an ancient love, but shaped by who they had become. Looking around the room at humans and Zephyrians working together, Morrison realized that he had found his true purpose. He was the bridge between worlds, the living proof that different peoples could not only coexist, but thrive together. And as Queen Lirelei slipped her hand into his, he knew that some love stories are strong enough to survive death, transformation, and time itself. Sometimes, they just need a second chance to bloom in a new form.